Welcome back to TMP Origins, the series where we peel back the earliest layers of Dusty's and my travel story. One photo, one mispronunciation, and one accidental adventure at a time. Last episode, we tried to visit Greenwood Cemetery, only to find it closed. Classic us, this seems to be a pattern. So we crossed the street and wandered into St. Patrick's Cemetery number 2, not knowing a single thing about it. No itinerary, no research, no why behind the stones. Just two curious souls wandering rows of tombs, admiring the architecture, and quietly trying to guess which ones were damaged by Katrina. But now that we know the truth of this place, Dusty and I had accidentally walked straight into the story of the Irish who built New Orleans. And the history hits a whole lot harder. Let me take you back there, this time with the full picture. To understand this cemetery, you have to imagine New Orleans in the 1830s and 40s, a booming port city overflowing with cotton, commerce, and opportunity. And into this chaos came tens of thousands of Irish immigrants, poor, Catholic, English-speaking outsiders in a French Creole city. A people arriving with more hope than resources, and more sickness than immunity. Because here's the part nobody tells you on the ghost tours. Yellow fever wasn't just a disease, it was a weapon. Locals had partial immunity. New arrivals had none. So when an epidemic hit, it was the Irish who suffered the most. Whole families arrived on a ship and were buried within weeks. The 1853 outbreak alone killed more than 8,000 New Orleanians, one of the deadliest epidemics in U.S. history. The Irish Channel became a neighborhood of grief, and St. Patrick's Parish did something radical for its time. They built cemeteries, their own cemeteries, so their dead could be buried with dignity. St. Patrick number 1 filled fast. Number 2, this one, became the cemetery of the survivors, of families who were finally finding stability, of people determined to stay, to build, to belong. And behind all of this was the firebrand himself, Father James Ignatius Mullon. This man was a force. He led the first English-speaking Catholic parish in the city, built with the magnificent St. Patrick's Church to rival the Creole Cathedral, and defended his people with a stubbornness that could crack granite. He battled anti-immigrant violence. He fought the Know-Nothing Party. He stood up to prejudice, plague, and poverty on behalf of the Irish community. There's a famous legend, maybe true, maybe embellished, where Union General Benjamin Butler confronted him about his refusal to bury a Union soldier, and Mullon allegedly said he'd gladly preside over the funerals of Butler and all his men. That's the kind of man whose fingerprints are all over this cemetery. Walking through St. Patrick number 2, you're walking through the world he built, the place where his community found stability after the storm. But not every Irish story in New Orleans has a tomb to market. One of the most heartbreaking chapters is the story of the men who dug the New Basin Canal. Between 1832 and 1838, thousands of newly arrived Irish immigrants were hired to carve a canal through miles of swamp, by hand, with pickaxes, in heat that would melt your soul. The work was so dangerous that enslaved workers were not used because they were considered too valuable. Let that sit for a moment. Many of the Irish workers never made it out. Killed by yellow fever, exhaustion, cholera, injuries, all of it. Local legend says 30,000 Irish died digging the canal. Historians agree that number's impossible, but the real toll? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Still horrific. Most were buried wherever they fell, unmarked, unnamed, part of the levees they built. So when you walk through St. Patrick No. 2, you're seeing the graves of those who survived, those who lived long enough to build families, businesses, and futures. But the canal diggers? Their monument came over a century later, a Celtic cross to honor the forgotten. If these quiet corners of history hit you the way they hit me, go ahead and subscribe. There are so many more hidden stories across the South we haven't told yet. And trust me, the next one is a journey. New Orleans history isn't just grit and tragedy. Sometimes it gives you someone with a heart big enough to anchor a whole city. Enter Margaret Haughery. She arrived in New Orleans with nothing, then lost her husband and child almost immediately. Most people would crumble under that kind of grief. Margaret built a mission. She started feeding orphans out of a dairy cart. Then she built a bakery. Then she built 7 orphanages. And she didn't care what race or religion the children were. She cared that they were hungry, and she was going to feed them. Her bakery became one of the largest in the South. She used the profits to shelter, clothe, and raise thousands of kids. When she died, the entire city mourned. They erected one of the first public statues of a woman in the United States, a simple monument that reads, Margaret, because everyone already knew her story. If the Irish community survived the epidemics, if any of these tombs belonged to families who made it beyond those deadly summers, there's a good chance Margaret is part of why. St. Patrick's Cemetery No. 2 doesn't have the fame of St. Louis No. 1. It doesn't have the towering monuments of Greenwood. It doesn't appear in the tourist brochures with dramatic music and fog machines, but it holds something just as powerful. The story of a community finding its footing. Here you see the full arc. Simple coping graves of the poorest immigrants. The names of counties from Cork to Kilkenny. The shift into family tombs as the Irish begin to thrive. The scars of Katrina etched into cracked plaster. And the stubborn endurance of a people who refused to vanish. Dusty and I didn't know any of this when we walked through it. We just admired the architecture and wondered about the damage. But now, looking back, I realized we were walking through a chapter of the city's soul, a quiet monument to survival, resilience, and community. This isn't just a cemetery. It's a testament. And now that we've explored the Irish story of New Orleans, next week we'll drive through the 9th Ward area again and make an impulsive decision to skip the highway and take the scenic route home. So stick around, hit subscribe, and as always, get out there and explore the world your way.